Today I'd like to talk about setting files in DaVinci Resolve. A setting file is what you get when you save a collection of nodes from the Fusion tab. Let's see an example. I'm just going to bring a few nodes in here real quick. I will bring in a background node. Let me move the media node over here. How about a text node? And let's just merge them real quick. And let's put together something that looks a little less generic than this. How about a nice green background and some text that says hello world. Okay, so I'm not going to jazz it up too much because the focus is on the nodes. In this composition right now we have 4 nodes, and there's several different ways you could save these nodes or save this composition for use in future projects. One way is you could actually save the overall project, and this could just be a Fusion composition within that project. You could also create generators, titles, effects, and node groups and other things like that. But underneath all of those things is the setting file. So that's why I'm starting here. What makes this composition unique are these 3 nodes. Every composition has a media out, so we'll play around with whether or not we need a media out node. Let me show you what happens if you save this. If you select all 4 nodes and right-click anywhere, if you go to Settings, there are 2 ways to save it. You can save all or save as. Let's go ahead and click Save All As. And I'm going to call this a hello world dot setting. There we go. Saved. Now let's take a look at the file that was created. Here I am in a program called Visual Studio Code. This program is what a lot of software engineers use to write code. But you can actually use it even if you're not a software engineer. You can still use this to look at files in a helpful way. So here we see hello world.setting, and you can see there's quite a bit of information in here. Now, one thing that you'll notice is these vertical lines. In Visual Studio Code, this is a way for you to collapse groups of text, bits of text, and usually it groups the text by indentation. So like here we have this entire bit of text, and there's something called inputs equals, and all this is inside braces. Visual Studio Code is really good at allowing you to collapse that. So if this is something you would like to do, you don't have to use this at all. You could just use any type of text editor. But you might want to take a look at Visual Studio Code. It's free. You can download it from Microsoft's website. Now let's look at what we have here. At the top, you have something like a list of ordered tools, as that's what suggests. It says tools equals ordered. And then there's text 1, which is n equals text plus, background 1, background, and then merge 1, merge. So what is going on here? Before we dig in a little bit further, let's go back to our comp and rename these nodes so they're not so generic. So here, instead of text, I'm going to hit F2 to rename this, and I'm just going to call this hello world. Let's come to the background, and I'm going to hit F2 to rename this, and I'm just going to call it like a light green. And then merge, let's do something goofy. Let's call it stacker. And media out 1, let's just call it output. There. Now we're going to go through and do the same thing that we did previously. Select them all, right-click somewhere, Settings, Save All As, and we're going to kind of clobber this file, hello world.setting. We're just going to overwrite that. Yes, replace it. Now that we've done that, let's return to the hello world.setting file. Look what the first bit is, the first chunk here. It says hello world equals text plus. Hello world is the name of the node in Fusion. Text plus is the type of node. If we pop back, so here is the hello world node. If you mouse over it and just wait, you'll get this pop-up. And it gives you a little bit of information about what's going on in the composition. But the first 2 lines are what's key here. Hello world, that's the name of the node. And underneath that you have in parentheses text plus, comma, txt plus. That first bit is the name of the node, or the type of node, I should say, and the second txt plus is like a keyboard shortcut or an abbreviation. So if we come back here, we see the next node here is a merge node, which we called stacker. The third node is a background node named light green, and then finally we have an output node that's a media out node, and we just called it output. If you just look at this, you will see that it contains a lot of the information from that node. So let's look at Hello World. There's a global out, there's a width and a height, and the width and the height have a value of 1920 by 1080 because this is an HD composition. There's something called style text, and notice how these all have input and a value. So if we come back to Fusion, you can see for the Hello World node, there's a whole lot of parameters that can be adjusted. There's the text itself, which we did change to be Hello World. We didn't touch anything else. And so you'll notice that the information here in the list of inputs for the Hello World node is not nearly as long as all the available parameters in the inspector in Fusion. And you might ask, well, why is that? When you save this node to a file, why doesn't it include everything? Really what it does is it includes those things which are kind of unique to your composition. Let's look next at the light green node. It's a background node, and it has a color. It also has a position. It has something called pixel aspect, which allows you to change the shape of individual pixels. So if we come back here and scroll down to the light green node, which is the background node, you'll see it has the width and height of this node. The output of this node is HD, and it has the color. Red, green, blue is 0.26 repeating, 0.498, etc. And you can look over here that if you come to the color, 0.26 repeating, 0.498, etc. There's alpha, and there's the pixel aspect. Notice here it does not have alpha, so maybe that is a good example of a parameter that was not included in the file because we didn't change it. To see what happens, I'm going to come up here and let's change the alpha for the background to, let's just lower it so there's a little bit of transparency. Let's go to something like 0.65. Now what I'm going to do is select all these nodes, right click, settings, save all as, and instead of Hello World, instead of overriding that, I'd like us to be able to compare something. I'm going to call this Hello World, and I should spell this correctly, that's a good habit. And I'm going to call it alpha changed. Now when we come back over to Visual Studio Code, you'll see that we have both files here. Another neat thing about Visual Studio Code is you can select two files, right click and say compare them. So here is a comparison of these two files. And also if you look at the margin, you can see red and green to show that kind of highlights things that were added or removed. Now the only difference between these is the order. On the new file here, light green's at the top. And at our original file, light green is second from the bottom. So the order is a little bit different. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to select this, copy it, scroll back up, and make this there. So now they're in the same order. And let's get rid of this little white space there at the end. So now the only difference between these two files you can see is right here. We changed the alpha parameter on the background node. And now, because that's no longer the default value of 1, the dot setting file contains the value for the alpha. And what I'm driving home here, and this seems like something you may never really need to be concerned with, because why would you work with text files here when you can come over to Fusion and DaVinci Resolve and work here? There are some times where I've run into problems where it's sometimes easier to just go into the setting file and make a change. But also down the line, when you want to make your own custom macros and you want to make some changes to those, you will need to go into the setting file. So it's kind of good to understand what this looks like, to recognize the appearance of a setting file, and that what it is a list of ordered tools, as they're calling them here. Here, most people would probably call them nodes. You might hear people call them operators, and also they're called tools. So like if you hit Shift space and you get a pop-up, notice at the top here they're called, it says select tool. So even Resolve in the Fusion tab here, it calls them tools. In Houdini, for example, these things are called nodes and operators. So whenever you're working with a procedural or node-based environment, you'll hear all those words. So coming back here, we have an ordered list of nodes. And the main thing to take away is that you have the node name and the node type. And what follows here are the parameters, and namely the parameters that you've changed or for whatever reasons are always essential to include. Okay, so the big takeaway here is when you make a composition in Fusion, you can export all of it, which we did. You don't even have to export all of it. You could say, you know, really what I'm interested in is I really like this background color. Let's say it was much more complicated than what it is. You could right click, go to settings, save as, and let's just call it, actually it's a good name, light green setting. So let's save that. Come back to Visual Studio Code, and we have a new file, lightgreen.setting. And you can see here, it's an ordered list of tools, but it's a list of one. And that one tool is light green, the background. You could, over time, start to build up a nice library of setting files. The next question is this is how we go from Fusion to a setting file, but how can we flip that around? If someone gives you a setting file, how can you bring that into Fusion? Let me show you. First, I'll go ahead and delete everything here. Next, I'm going to open a file explorer, not Visual Studio Code, because it's not so much that I want the nice tools for looking at and comparing files. I want access to the files themselves. So on my system, I'm on a Windows machine here. Here are the 3 setting files. To bring one of them into Fusion is actually as simple as drag and drop. So let's bring in the light green setting file. Just drag it into the node parameter, and there you go. Not the node parameter, the node panel, sorry here. Let me delete this. Now let's go to a more complicated one, the hello world, where we changed the alpha. If we drag it in, there you go. All 4 nodes are there, and if you go to light green, you'll see the alpha has been adjusted. Now, you're not restricted to just one setting file. Like here, we brought in the hello world alpha changed, and we could also bring in hello world 2 if we wanted. So now we have all the nodes from both of those files. One thing to take note, though, is look at the names of them. The first text is called hello world. Over here, it's called hello world _1. But if you come back here and open the hello world file, you'll see that the text plus node is called hello world. And the one where we changed the alpha, it's also called hello world. So we have a conflict in nodes here, in tools. We have 2 tools that were both named hello world, and they're both text plus nodes. And to avoid conflict, what Fusion does is it appends an underscore and a number. So this was the first one there, so it claimed the name hello world, and when we drag this in to avoid duplicate names, it just appended an _1. In fact, it appended that everywhere. I'd also like to point out that you can bring the same file in more than once too. So you could bring in hello world once, and you could bring it in again. And notice once again, because of name conflict, it appends the _1. This is, let me go ahead and select all. Let me see, can I bring 3 in at once? Actually, I can. That's kind of nice. I hadn't tried that before. It's good to know you can do that. But it's interesting that it looks like some of the connections were lost. One other thing I'd like to point out is when I bring in let's bring in hello world. So here is the arrangement of the 4 nodes. Hello world is up here. And you can just try to keep this picture in your mind of how this looks. Come back to Visual Studio Code. Let's open up Hello World. For each operator, there's something called view info. And it's operator info, and it's POS, which is position. So it gives actually the coordinates of the location of that node in the node editor. So if we come back here, let's bring Hello World in. I will show you what happens if we take light green and we'll move it to the left, and Hello World will bring it down here. Let's come back here. Light green, the position is X is 275 and Y is 148. Let's go ahead and make the X 175. So it'll be moved to the left 100 pixels here. And then Hello World has a Y of 49, whereas the light green has a Y of 148, and the others all have a Y coordinate of 148. So it seems to me that going down is increasing the Y. So here, let's do something like 249.5. Now I save this file. Let me go ahead and delete this and drag in hello world.setting. And there you go. Hello world is now at the bottom, and light green is a little further away from Stacker than it was before. You can notice before these two connecting arrows were the same length, and now this one is a little bit longer. So there you go. That's how you can take a bunch of nodes in a Fusion composition and save them as a setting file. And conversely, bringing the setting file into Fusion is as simple as dragging and dropping it on your system. Now, from here, where do we go from here? Now that you know what a setting file is and how to use them, sometimes you just want to have more convenient access to this. You don't want to have to drag and drop files and things like that. What would be good is in the cut edit pages, if you could come up to effects and maybe have them available here as a generator, an effect, a title, or what have you. This would be an example of either a macro or you could do it as a group. And also there are a few gotchas you have to be aware when you make your own custom generator and whatnot. And then also you may want to have a bunch of setting files and you might want to zip them together into your own custom library. And that way you can just have a single file that you can share with colleagues or friends or even sell. But those will be covered in other videos. That's all for now, and I will see you in the future.